Okay, I get way too much enjoyment out of that. I could do that all day. I won't, but I could. What's up, YouTube? It's your boy, FeiyuTech. And if this is your first time here to the channel, welcome and thanks for stopping by. Make sure you subscribe with all notifications turned on so you never miss another video on this channel. And if you've been here before or if you're already subscribed, welcome back. So today, as you can see in my hands, I have the new FeiyuTech AK4500 Gimbal. FeiyuTech sent me this gimbal a few weeks back for review, and I gotta say, it has been a lot of fun testing, and I figured out a few things, all of which I'm gonna discuss in this video. We're gonna break down what this thing does, how it does it, and whether or not I actually recommend this thing for your own equipment arsenal. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I promise that's the last time I'm gonna do that to the camera. All right, let's start the review. So when it comes to this gimbal, let's start things out with the basics, the main purpose of any gimbal: stabilization. Obviously, the whole point of a gimbal is to provide stabilization when you're shooting video. And unfortunately, not all gimbals are made the same. Some definitely struggle when it comes to stabilization, while others actually shine and do a remarkable job. As you can see from some of the test footage that I shot on this FeiyuTech AK4500, the footage is pretty much buttery smooth. The gimbal's footage is noticeably stabilized and can make for an immediate professional difference and cinematic effect in your footage. And for the test shots, as you can see, I shot test shots both with and without in-body image stabilization of my camera turned on. It eliminates pretty much all major shakes and jitters while also cleaning up some of the more minor shakes and jitters you sometimes get when filming on a gimbal. Good stabilization is only just brushing the surface of all that this gimbal is supposed to be capable of. But before we get into that, let's quickly break down the build quality and the design. Overall, the AK4500 is a solid quality gimbal. You could feel it in your hands. It feels well built. It feels solid. It's not gonna break. It feels durable. And it also feels comfortable in your hands. You get these rubberized grips on the handles of the gimbal itself. It's surprisingly not too heavy despite feeling so well built, but that does make sense. It is made out of space level ultralight aluminum alloy metal. And the cherry on top for all this is the fact that this thing has a max payload, are you ready, of 10.14 pounds or 4.6 kilograms. A 10-pound payload on this thing. That's nice. That's a little bit of breathing room. That gives me some room to add some more to my rig if I want to start expanding a little bit on this thing. Also talking about build quality and design, as you can see, we have this interesting versatile arm that sticks out on the back of the gimbal, which clearly, as you can see, actually allows you to attach a secondary handle. Now I'm using a remote controller, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this review, but you could also attach the extension rod that you get with the AK4500 on that as a handle as well. No matter which one you use, I cannot stress enough how clutch this second handle has been in my gimbal filmmaking. That second point of contact makes all your gimbal moves a lot more accurate, a lot more precise. That second handle will hopefully balance that weight out between your two shoulders and give you a little bit of a break when it comes to actually using this thing. But another huge plus about this gimbal that I am head over heels in love with is this angled upper arm that you get on the top part of the gimbal. As you can see, this clears the area directly behind the camera where your display monitor usually is. On some gimbals, this upper arm is in line with the camera, so the actual arm blocks what you would see on that display monitor. On this gimbal though, it's angled, so you have a full clearance there to be able to see your display monitor on the back of your camera pretty much no matter what angle you're using in shooting on this gimbal. And then to top all that off, if I shut the gimbal down, turn it off for a second, you will see, obviously this is a 3-axis stabilizer right here, but at each of the axes, I'm just gonna say axes, easier to say. At each of the 3 axes, you even have a positioning lock, which, as the name suggests, allows you to lock that axis into place. Now this is super helpful for when you're traveling. This will make sure your gimbal is actually protected. On other gimbals I have, there's no way to do that. And then if you consider the fact that you could actually take off the versatile arm, as well as detach the remote controller or the extension rod as your secondary handle, that'll come down into 2 parts. And the fact that you could actually separate the top part of the gimbal from the bottom part, now all of a sudden traveling with this thing is pretty much a non-issue. You just break this thing down into as many small parts as you need to be able to fit it in your bag, and you're good to go. It's easier to travel with, and it is safer for your gimbal to protect it from any kind of damage. Putting it back together could not be easier. That literally took like a second. Boom, it's back together. And let's not neglect the fact that you actually have a quick release plate and a secondary plate on the top of the gimbal to actually attach your camera to it, which makes taking your camera on and off your gimbal easy as pie. We just took it off, but to put it back on could not be easier. Just take it, slide it in, you're good to go. That's actually a really helpful feature because that allows you to take the camera off of the gimbal and put it back on without having to rebalance every single time, because that balance is pretty much locked into place through that plate system on top. But if you were switching up the camera or had to rebalance, I've actually found those positioning locks to be helpful to actually balancing the thing out. To do that, I just lock the 3 axes in place like we have right there, and then I just work from the top down, making sure each axis is balanced. Using those positioning locks to isolate the different axes and balance them one at a time, super helpful to have. But now that you could probably clearly see I'm a huge fan of the gimbal build quality and design, let's start to talk more about the gimbal itself, the different modes that are available, the controls you have, all that good stuff. Starting things out, on the back of the gimbal, we have a shortcut button right here, which if you left off on like a pan or a tilt or something like that and the gimbal wasn't actually lined up or the camera wasn't lined up with your gimbal facing forward, you could just double tap that, boom, and you'll go right back to the start. You can also use the shortcut button by pressing and holding it, and when you do that, you'll automatically go into pan and tilt mode for your gimbal. So it's a nice little shortcut button to have for that mode if you wanted to use that, or if you use that mode most often as well. On the right side of the gimbal, we actually have a function button right here, and right now the only purpose for that, if you click it, it would actually lock the touch screen display, which you get on this gimbal. We'll talk about that in just a second. Moving on to the left side of the gimbal, we have this really cool wheel looking function right here, which you can see is actually a multi-function knob with multiple functions, as the name would suggest. And the multiple functions you could actually use this multi-function knob for, well, for starters, you can actually use it as a follow focus. The AK4500 does have a follow focus system that you could use with this gimbal, and you could actually adjust that focus through this multi-function knob on the side here. It could also be used for digital zooming, but that of course depends on the specific camera you're using. I instead actually use it for a different mode, which you could toggle into by pressing and holding on it. That'll actually put you into pan, tilt, and roll mode, which means through this multifunction knob, by rotating it, you can now control all 3 of those settings through the knob. Another press, you're gonna change that setting, and then another press right there, you'll change it one more time. Like I said, this is most helpful for when you're actually using your gimbal as a tripod, but it's nice to know that you have that option, and I do think it'll come in handy. And now let's get to the good stuff. Let's talk about the front of the gimbal, or is that technically the back? Front, back? You know what I'm talking about, the side with the touchscreen. So now let's start talking about the touchscreen side, and as you can see, a beautiful layout of controls here. The touchscreen alone has been an absolute game changer in the way I actually use and interact with this gimbal. You immediately see everything you need to know about this gimbal. You can see if it's connected, you can see the battery level, you can see what mode you're in, and with a simple tap, you can even change the mode that you're in. So nice to have, unlike some of the other gimbals I've used where you had to actually like cycle through either through a single press, double press, or triple press to change the mode that you're in for your gimbal. So now you don't have to worry about any of that. You see it all and you can change it all through a touchscreen display right on the gimbal itself on the AK4500. And pretty much anything you could ever think of in terms of settings and modes is fully accessible in that display. In addition to that lovely touchscreen display, you also have your joystick and a couple other buttons there. The joystick, of course, controlling your pan and tilt, while you also have a mode button in case you want to use that, as well as a capture and a record button, which could actually control the camera that's connected to your gimbal through a USB cord. Again, that'll depend on the camera you're using, but you do have that functionality in case it's compatible. And then, of course, a power button to actually turn on and off the gimbal. But so far, it's pretty easy to see why I love this gimbal. You have all your controls right within a thumb's reach on the actual gimbal itself. And once you get the hang of what each button does, cycling through the different modes or knowing exactly what you want to pull off with this gimbal, it's all right there. I mean, you can't miss it. And all that alone is probably enough to say that this is a great addition to your equipment arsenal, but there are a few more things we gotta talk about. There are a few key accessories which makes this gimbal setup even better. Like for instance, this extension rod, like we talked about earlier, which you could attach to the bottom of the gimbal for extra support or just to be able to get a higher angle, I suppose. Or it could actually use it in replace of the remote controller, which we'll talk about in just a second, on the actual back of the gimbal as part of the versatile arm and use it there like we showed you earlier. You also get this clutch tripod stand, which as you can see, based on this video, I use all the time. It's so nice to have this just to be able to quickly pick up and put down your gimbal without having to turn it off or put it on the side or anything like that. And when you fold down the folding legs of the tripod, it actually acts as a mini extension rod right there. And the outside of the tripod legs are also rubberized. So again, the little details here that FeiyuTech put into this gimbal, I love it. I love it. All the little thoughts that went into this gimbal. So good. And then next up, as we can see, we have to talk about something that's been sticking out during this review. Literally, it's been sticking out. This is a little something I want to talk about right now. Yes, this is a secondary handle that you could use when using this gimbal, but it also doubles as something else if I detach it here. This thing is also a remote controller for your gimbal. Yes, you could actually control the gimbal through this thing. This is the FeiyuTech Hyperlink remote controller. And you'll see if we reset and put our gimbal right here, this thing is basically a mini gimbal. It looks just like your actual gimbal and pretty much has all the same basic controls, but via a wireless remote controller. And it is pretty darn cool, and I'm gonna show you why. First of all, you get a nice display on the front of this little remote controller right here, which again, tells you everything that's going on. If we press the multifunction knob on the remote controller, just like we have on the gimbal, if I start rotating the multifunction knob of the remote controller, all of a sudden, once again, we have now wireless control of our pan, tilt, and roll. So cool. And we also have this trigger button in the back, similar to the shortcut button on the gimbal. If we double tap that, gimbal resets itself, super nice little shortcut. But then here is where things get even more interesting. If we press and hold down on that trigger button, now we are toggling into what's called motion sense mode, and look, I basically have a magic wand in my hand that could control the gimbal through the remote controller motions and movements. It's literally like a magic wand. If you've ever wanted to be Harry Potter, now's your chance. Just get this gimbal and start doing this. So this is super cool to have. As you can see, it's totally in sync with my movements. Whatever I do with the remote controller, it's gonna do on the gimbal. Amazing. And all this, of course, is complete with a record/capture button on the front of the remote controller right here, as well as a mode and power button and a settings button on the right side of the remote controller, which will bring up the settings of the Hyperlink remote controller. And then all this is complete, of course, with your joystick, which, as you would imagine, controls the gimbal through joystick movements as well. But a couple things I do want to discuss here. As you probably saw, I have found there to be a slight lag or slight delay between my input on the remote controller and the actual gimbal movements. For instance, if I hold down that trigger button and then I rotate, you can see it's slightly out of sync. It catches up, but it's just not as reactive. So not a big deal there, but just know there is a slight delay. Again, that's probably not gonna be an issue because you probably shouldn't be filming going this fast with your pan and tilts and rolls and all that and everything else. Your movements, ideally, when you're in tripod mode like this, should be super slow because that'll translate on film. So it's a delay, but realistically, kind of a non-issue. And I just realized the lens cap has been on this entire time. Good thing I'm not actually filming because that would have been bad. But we'll put the lens cap off to the side. It doesn't matter. We're just doing this for demo purposes anyway. I'd use my Sony if this was really my rig. But that is how the Hyperlink remote controller works. I do think it's nice to have. I don't think it's something I'm gonna use every day, and it's probably not something that's super helpful for at least what I'm doing. But what is probably more important about this Hyperlink controller, which I think a lot of people actually miss. For one thing, I see a lot of people actually attaching it to their gimbal the wrong way. You'll see there's a cutout on the versatile arm and on the bottom of the Hyperlink remote controller that perfectly matches up, which suggests that this, well, it doesn't suggest, this is how you're supposed to connect it, not the top part. Don't use this adapter. It specifically says in the manual not to do so. I see a lot of people doing that. You shouldn't do that. So that will probably protect against damage right there so you don't snap it off. But more importantly, you'll notice now, if you use this gimbal with the two handles, with two hands, now all of a sudden you have control of the Hyperlink remote controller right where your hand just comfortably fits. So now you have perfect control of the multifunction knob on the left part of your hand and that joystick, and of course the touchscreen if you want to change your mode, as well as all that on your right hand as well through your right thumb. Super powerful little combo to have right there. But then I do want to talk about the different shooting modes you could shoot in. So we'll show those to you now. You have lock mode, which means the camera will stay in place. It will not rotate on any axis. You have pan mode, which means the gimbal can help you control the pan of the camera, but it will not tilt or roll. Then you have pan and tilt, which allows you to, exactly as the mode suggests, pan and tilt the camera, but no roll. Or you could have follow mode, which basically allows you to pan, tilt, roll, all of that just by moving the gimbal. Whatever direction you move the gimbal, that's the direction the camera's gonna move in. And then on the touchscreen, if we just swipe from right to left, you do have a couple additional modes I wanna talk about. You have a pretty cool Inception mode, which probably comes from the film Inception, as you might have guessed. It's a unique mode that allows you to shoot in a 360-degree motion rotation. Not something you'd use every day, but if you're shooting something for like your cinematic vlogs, kind of like I do here on YouTube, it's a cool little experimental mode to have that could create some pretty interesting shots and set you apart from all the other filmmakers on this platform, something unique. You also have a selfie mode, which will rotate the camera to face you. And then you also have portrait mode, which actually allows you to rotate the camera 90 degrees to shoot in what's considered portrait mode, if you want to flex on your Instagram stories, like I do from time to time. And then you also have motion time-lapse, which is a very cool mode, which, as you might have guessed, gives you a motion time-lapse across the different axes, which allows you to set a start point and an end point, and then basically either films a time-lapse from point A to B, or provides you with a real-time camera movement doing the same thing. God bless me. If you're trying to up your time-lapse game rather than just having a static time-lapse shot, if you want to add a little motion to it, this gimbal will take care of that for you. So it pretty much does everything. It's no longer just about a gimbal that stabilizes your footage, it's about what more can your gimbal do than just stabilize your footage. And I think it's pretty easy to see all that this AK4500 could do based on this review. So do I recommend this gimbal? Absolutely, and for the price that this thing sells for, it's kind of a steal for everything you're getting out of it. I do highly recommend you check out the FeiyuTech AK4500 Gimbal. As a matter of fact, if you're convinced by now that you should pick up an AK4500 for yourself, or if you just want to learn more about this gimbal, you guys can head to my affiliate link, bmac.link/AK4500. That is bmac.link/AK4500, or as always, that same clickable link could be found in the video description box below. So big shout out and thank you to FeiyuTech for sending out this AK4500 to me for review. The consensus is in. This thing's a beast, I love it. But do me a favor real quick, comment down below the feature you like most about the AK4500. Is there something in particular about this gimbal that jumped out at you? If so, comment it down below. In the meantime, I think I'm gonna go take a motion time-lapse because I could do that on this thing. I'll see you guys in my next video. I gotta be honest with you guys, I'm kind of deathly afraid of selfie mode on any gimbal. It's like all of a sudden you just go into that mode and the gimbal comes alive, turns around and looks at you and starts judging you. Okay, enough. That's scaring me. Stop. Go the other way.